Hello, brothers and sisters, and welcome to another episode of the Prostrate Protestant podcast. So, today we're going to be exploring the Roman Catholic age, which is a very in-depth, expansive age, and we're going to get into what separates Roman Catholicism from true Christianity. You will see the thread of that in the series. God bless you all, brothers and sisters. When the prostrate Protestant goes marching in. Late antiquity was an age of change in which Christianity became a permitted religion, then a favoured one, that transformed in every capacity. In 313, the Emperor Constantine, who was soon to become converted, the first Roman emperor to become converted to Christianity, issued the Edict of Milan, expressing tolerance for all religions. Thereafter he supported Christianity by giving bishops judicial power and established them as legally equal to polytheistic priests. He devoted personal and public funds to building churches and endowed them with funds to support their clergy. There were churches in the majority of Roman cities by the end of the 4th century. Art, architecture and literature blossomed under Constantine's reign. The basilica, a type of Roman municipal court hall, became the model for Christian architecture. Frescoes, mosaics, statues and paintings blended classical and Christian styles. Similarly, a hybrid form of poetry written in classical styles with Christian concepts emerged. In the late 4th century, Jerome was commissioned to translate the Greek biblical text into the Latin language. This translation was called the Vulgate. The church fathers of this period, including Augustine of Hippo, John Chrysostom, Gregory of Nyssa, Athanasius of Alexandria, Basil of Caesarea, Gregory of Nazianzus, Cyril of Alexandria, and Ambrose of Milan, wrote vast numbers of works. The ascetic ideal of these early church fathers was also embraced by monasticism, which had begun early in Syria and was key to the development of Catholicism. In late antiquity, these communities became associated with the urban holy places in Palestine, Cappadocia, Italy, Gaul, and Roman North Africa. In the 370s, Basil the Great founded the Basileus, a monastic community in Caesarea, which developed the first healthcare system for the poor, a forerunner of modern public hospitals. Christianity's or Catholicism's social impact, especially its charitable practices, contributed to its spread despite competition from traditional polytheism, alternative cults and creeds, i.e. other groups that were really Christian and that were opposing the main denomination at that time, which was Catholicism, which had taken over Rome. There was no legislation forcing the conversion of pagans before the Byzantine Emperor Justinian I, and polytheism remained in some places into the 9th century. Even so, blood sacrifice, which had been a central rite of virtually all religious groups in the pre-Christian Mediterranean, disappeared by the end of the 4th century due to hostile imperial laws. While there was occasional hostility, actual religious violence between pagans and Christians was not a general phenomenon, quite ironic considering Catholics are pagan. Speech in the form of polemical rhetoric was the main force of violence. Arguments centered on the true meaning of logos, the word. Pagans asserted logos could be found in ancient myths and poetics as allegory. Christian responses formed their first true ontologies, distinct from early apologetics asserting the Christian logos. However, the primary focus of biblical commentators between 300 and 600 was not on polemical responses to pagans, but on aiding ordinary Christians whose primary concern was sin and salvation. Christian baptism was distinctive and demonstrated how Christians understood these concepts in terms of the death of Christ. As theology evolved, it held to the paradox of God's incarnation, as well as the decisive human contribution to redemption, seeing in Jesus Christ as a new human being who is God. Before the 4th century, Judaism has been an approved religion, while Christianity was persecuted as an illegal superstition. During the 4th century, Christianity became favoured by emperors, and Judaism came to be seen as a heresy. Still, Augustine of Hippo, a church father, argued that Jews should not be killed or forcibly converted. They should be left alone because they preserved the teachings of the Old Testament, were living witnesses of the New Testament. Aside from the Visigothic kingdom, Jews and Christians peacefully coexisted in the High Middle Ages. Constantine and his successors attempted to fit the church into their political programme. Church leaders responded with the first fully articulated limitation on secular authority, arguing that the church was not part of the empire so much as the empire was part of the universal church. During this period, the successor to Peter as Bishop of Rome, known as the Pope, had limited influence, and they lacked the power to break free of secular involvement in church affairs. However, papal power began to rise as Eastern patriarchs looked to the Pope to resolve disagreements. Christianity grew rapidly throughout this period. Christians in Persia were deeply persecuted in late antiquity, but their numbers still grew. A form of Christianity made inroads among Arabs in Palestine, Yemen and Arabia. In the 4th century, the percentage of Christians was as high in the Sasanian Empire as in the Roman Empire. Even as the Huns, Ostrogoths, Visigoths and Vandals caused havoc in the Roman Empire in the 4th and 5th centuries, many of them converted to Christianity. Syria was home to a thriving theological school. The Gospel was first brought to Central Asia and China by Syriac-speaking missionaries. Christian institutions in Asia or East Africa never developed this kind of influence that the European churches in Byzantium had. In 301, the Kingdom of Armenia became the first nation to adopt Christianity as its state religion, soon followed by Caucasian Albania and the East African Kingdom of Aksum. Christianity, a minority faith in Britain since the 2nd century, began to be displaced by Anglo-Saxon paganism in the 5th century. However, this process began reversing after the Gregorian mission of 597. In the early 5th century, missionaries began conversions in Ireland as well. Now, regional variants of Christianity produced diverse and sometimes competing theologies. Ancient Christian authors identified any practice or doctrine which differed from apostolic tradition as heresy. Now this is where it gets very murky in Christian history. The number of laws directed at heresy indicate it was a much higher priority than paganism for Christians of this period. So at this time there were legitimate cults that emerged, and one of them was known as Arianism. It embroiled the entire church, laity and clergy alike, in arguing whether Jesus' divinity was equal to the Father's. So we see here that this was the first time a group came out of Christianity that was non-Trinitarian. The First Council of Nicaea in 325 attempted to resolve the controversy with the Nicene Creed, which we'll get into later in this episode, but some refused to accept it. The development of heresy demonstrated the importance of boundaries, which became a force for social stability through cultural assimilation. Along the Eastern Mediterranean, where Christian factions struggled without resolution, communities were weakened, affecting their long-term survival. Christian scriptures were formalised as the Old Testament, distinguished from the Old Testament by the 4th century. Formalised as the New Testament. Despite agreement on these texts, differences between East and West were becoming evident. The West was solidly Nicene, while the East was largely Arian. So there was a major split at this point. The West condemned Roman culture as sinful and resisted state control, whereas the East harmonised with Greek culture and aimed for unanimity between church and state. That's why we need separation of church and state, because then we have a theocracy, which is very dangerous for us. The marriage of clerics was accepted in the East but forbidden in the West. The East advocated sharing the government of the church between 5 church leaders, arguing that the patriarchs of Constantinople, Alexandria, Antioch and Jerusalem were equal to the Pope. Rome asserted papal primacy. Controversies over how Jesus' human and divine natures coexisted peaked when Nestorius declared Mary as the mother of Jesus' humanity, that is divinity, thereby giving Jesus 2 distinct natures. This led to a series of ecumenical councils. The Council of Ephesus was the Church's 3rd council that condemned Nestorius. Held in 431, the Church in the Persian Empire refused to recognise his authority. This led to the first separation between East and West. 2 general groups of Persians and Syrians became the Church of the East, also known as the Syrian Nestorian or Persian Church, while the majority of Christians in Syria and Mesopotamia became Syrian Orthodox Church Jacobite. This cut off the flourishing school of Syrian Semitic Christian theologians and writers from the rest of Christendom. The Church of the East lay almost entirely outside the Byzantine Empire. It became the principal church in Asia in the Middle Ages. In 451, the 4th council was the influential Council of Chalcedon. While most of Christianity accepted the Chalcedonian definition, which emphasises that the Son is one person in 2 natures, there were those who found that description too close to the duality of Nestorianism. So after 484, they separated into Oriental Orthodoxy, that sees only one nature of God, the incarnate Logos. The deposition of Romulus Augustulus in 476 marked the fall of the Western Roman Empire. The ensuing political fragmentation allowed the Church to assume responsibility over Western Europe. For the next 5 centuries, Western culture and civilization were primarily preserved by monks, while the Eastern Roman Empire continued to embrace Roman culture with an emperor, a civil government, and a large army. The religious policies of the Eastern Roman Emperor Justinian I reflected his conviction that the unity of the empire presupposed unity of faith. He persecuted pagans and religious minorities, purging the government and church bureaucracies those who disagreed with him. What a hypocrite, eh? Justinian contributed to cultural development and integrated Christian concepts with Roman law in his Corpus Juris Civilis, which remains the basis of civil law in many modern states. So, yet again, we see a syncretized religion in Rome. In Gaul, the Frankish king Clovis I converted to Catholicism. His kingdom became the dominant polity in the West in 507 and gradually converted to a Catholic kingdom over the next centuries. Papal influence rose as the public increasingly relied on Rome to resolve theological disagreement. Pope Gregory I gained prestige and power for the papacy by leading a response to invasion by the Lombards in 592 and 93, reforming the clergy, standardising music and worship, sending out missionaries and founding new monasteries. Until 751, the Pope remained a subject of the Byzantine Empire. By the early 600s, Christianity had spread around the Mediterranean. However, between 632 and 750, a new threat had emerged: Islam. Islamic caliphates conquered the Middle East, North Africa and the Iberian Peninsula. Muslim rule devastated urban Asian churches, but Christian communities established in remote areas between the 5th and the 8th centuries continued to survive. In the same period, war on multiple fronts contributed to the Eastern Roman Empire becoming an independent Byzantine Empire. Until the 8th century, Germanic peoples remained largely impoverished, politically fragmented, and dependent on the church. So we can see there's a build-up now to the Reformation period, which came much later on. The early Middle Ages saw the formation of a Western Christendom. The notion of all Christians united as a polity emerged at the end of this age. And we can also see that ecumenism has been seen throughout history. It's been around for a very long time. During this period, invasion, deportation and governmental neglect left many communities without a church, causing Christianity to syncretize with local pagan traditions. The church of this age was only directly influenced by the Bible. Monasteries served as orphanages and inns for travellers at this time and provided food for those in need. They supported literacy, practiced classical arts and crafts, and copied and preserved ancient texts in their scriptoria and libraries. Dedicated monks created illuminated manuscripts. From the 6th to the 8th centuries, most schools were connected to monasteries, but methods of teaching an illiterate populace could also include mystery plays, vernacular sermons, saints' lives and epic form and artwork. This was an age of uncertainty, and the role of relics and holy men able to provide special access to the divine became increasingly important. Donations for the dead to receive prayers with that special access provided an ongoing source of wealth. Monasteries became increasingly organised, gradually establishing their own authorities separate from political and familial authorities, thereby revolutionary social history. Medical practice was highly important. Medieval monasteries were best known for their public hospitals, hospices and their contributions to medicine. The 6th century rule of Saint Benedict has had extensive influence. These developed an approach to sacred art unknown in the West, adopting ancient portraiture and icons as intercessors between God and humankind. In the 720s, the Byzantine Emperor Leo banned the pictorial representation of Christ, saints and biblical scenes, and destroyed much early representational art. So here is an early form of iconoclasm. The West condemned the iconoclasm of Leo and some of his successors. By the 10th and early 11th centuries, Byzantine culture began to recover its artistic heritage. Eastern Europe had been exposed to Christianity during Roman rule, but as Byzantine Christianity, brought by the 9th century saints Cyril and Methodius, that was integral to the formation of its modern states. The brothers developed the Glagolic alphabet to translate the Bible into the local language. Their disciples then developed the Cyrillic script, which spread literacy and became the cultural and religious foundation for all Slavic nations. So there you have it, brothers and sisters. The Roman Catholic Age, Episode 1. Catch you all in the next episode. God bless you all.